All right, so today we're going to be looking at serving the DIY patron, library instruction at the point of need. So a lot of stuff about sort of front-loaded projects where you're building content to be available at students' point of need that really doesn't require much of a high-touch approach after that. So it's really this week is really a big departure from what we've looked at in the past, which has largely been around high touch collaboration, and this is very much about sort of embedding our help, not live help for the most part, but embedding library help in different places online and even around campus. So I wanted to start by sort of talking about why we even need point of need help content. Um, and when we look at sort of the reference model that we have had for decades, we can see that it was based on a way of information seeking that doesn't really exist anymore. So back then, a lot of libraries had closed stacks, especially academic libraries. So you couldn't actually go get a book on your own. It was all about mediated searching because the systems that we could search, that were searchable, like LexisNexis and whatnot, used command language, which most regular people didn't know, and were extremely expensive because they charged per search, as is still the case with things like dialogue. So it wasn't really available to regular people. And even the print indexes were not exactly the easiest things to use. They were pretty complex. And we were kind of in an age of information scarcity where you didn't have the gigantic web buffet that we have available to us now, or even what's available through the library now because of big deal database aggregator purchasing. So now we live in an era where most stacks are open, most students can search the catalog, get a book, and maybe even check it out if there's self-checkout without ever dealing with a library staff person. The search tools now are much more usable for our users. They're still not quite as intuitive as Google, but they're certainly a lot easier to use than they were 20, 30 years ago. We've moved to a lot of things like self-checkout, patron-driven acquisitions, unmediated ILL, all of these things that are unmediating what we traditionally had to mediate. So we're moving to an era where the library can be navigated without the help of a librarian pretty easily. And when you're in an age of information abundance, when you have the gigantic information buffet that students have accessible to them now, when they at least feel their time is scarce, students usually want to find something extremely quickly. I think there was an understanding back in the day that research took time because you had to consult all these different things. And now we have what is called satisficing, where students are pretty well satisfied with something that's just okay. They don't feel like they need to often find the best thing. So they'll pop into Google and find something, and that's good enough. And I think at a time when I think our attention spans have decreased significantly. I mean, you think about when we had dial-up internet, what we were willing to wait to access, and now it's like if something takes more than 3 seconds, forget it. We don't want to wait. So in this era, do the traditional models of mediated research really make sense? And what has all of this meant for reference? Because we have seen, changes in trends in reference. And in a lot of libraries, reference usage has declined significantly, especially when you look at research libraries, which is especially troubling because you would think that at research libraries there are a lot of people doing very serious research and that they would still kind of need a librarian's help. But we're seeing here a decline of over 60% between between 1995 and 2009. That is amazingly troubling. And I think ARLs have seen the most dramatic decline, but it's certainly affected other academic libraries as well. As you can see here, these are NCES statistics, and I could only get up to 2008. I couldn't find anything newer, but you'll see, looking at 1996, 1998 to 2008, a significant decline. And I think 1998 was around the time when the internet became more widely available, and we see this dramatic decline in reference transactions in academic libraries. And in public libraries across the country, we see that it's been very flat for the past more decade and a half. But if you look at California libraries, there's been a really significant decline. And I know a lot of you are in California. But even when it's flat, when you think about how much we've tried to make reference services more accessible, bringing them online, and even in some cases providing like 24-hour support with tutor.com or whatever, this is quite troubling to see that there hasn't been any increase in reference transactions. And some places, are the aberration. My library in the past few years has seen actually quite a bit of increase in reference desk traffic, but especially in online reference traffic. So we have actually bucked the trend, and there are aberrations out there, but for the most part, we're seeing declines. So lots of reasons why patrons might not ask for help, and we already talked about some of them with the growth of the internet and the fact that they can find things themselves. But for people who are actually having trouble finding things, there may be additional reasons why people might not want to ask a librarian. And library anxiety is a very real and documented issue where some people feel extremely uncomfortable in the library. They feel it's a place with rules that they don't understand, where they don't want to admit that they don't understand them, so asking for help is extremely anxiety producing for them. They've also found that the people with low academic self-efficacy, people who actually probably need help the most because they don't feel confident in their academic skills, they've found that they're the least likely to actually ask for help, because to them asking for help means admitting their ignorance about something. It means admitting that they lack ability, when those of us maybe with higher academic self-efficacy realize that asking for help is actually a great strategy, a great academic strategy. So that's really obviously problematic. There have been some theories around gender, the idea that girls sort of lose their voice during adolescence and feel less comfortable asking for help. This might be part of the issue in colleges with 18-year-olds and over. And also, I think part of the issue is really the lack of understanding of what a librarian does and why they're there. I think people feel like unless they have a very serious research question, they shouldn't ask for help. Sometimes they feel like they're bothering the librarian. I'm sure we've all, if we've been at a reference desk, had that situation where they're like, "I'm so sorry to bother you about this," and you're like, yeah, that's actually my job. And then there are people who I call DIY patrons who just want to figure things out themselves, and we're going to talk about them a little bit more. So we've seen this huge trend in society towards like DIY over the past decade or so, and that's largely about people wanting to do things themselves, whether it's building a radio or some kind of technical thing, or it's making their own soap, it's doing their own home improvement projects. There's really a movement towards doing things on your own. And I think we feel like in that era that would extend to research, where we could just figure it out ourselves. And the DIY patron, like all of us, are accustomed to using Google and other web services, which are fairly intuitive. They also utilize things like Wiki Answers and Yahoo Answers. I know we saw in the OCLC study that we looked at in, I believe, week 2, that there's a huge number of people who are using these answer sites, much more so than are using the library. And they want things to be intuitive. They expect things to be intuitive. And when they're not, they'll look for pointers like help screens or something in the system that will explain how things work. They're more likely to try different strategies than they are to actually read the manual. There was an interesting thing I read about the millennial generation that was like, no, they do not read instruction manuals on how to do things. They'll futz around with it and try through trial and error to figure it out themselves. And which is funny because I'm not a millennial, but I've actually always kind of been that way. I'm like, if I can't figure it out, I'll look at the instructions, but I'll usually try to, make it work. And here's a great quote that I think really articulates both what we need to do and how challenging that is. We desperately need to invest serious thought and effort into ways that we will not only provide access to information, but also maintain the connections between the wired user and the information expert to demonstrate that the added value that we provide users in this information-saturated environment is far greater than the mere convenience of getting it all online. And doing that is such a tall order, actually providing a value statement that makes it clear that somehow what we are providing is better, and getting them to buy into that is quite a tall order. So the answer for reference instruction, and this is in addition to all of the things that we've talked about this term, is to look at how we can disintermediate whenever possible. And that doesn't mean that we don't also provide high-touch services, but for those who aren't going to ask for help, who aren't going to be in the classes that we're going to work with, we need to think about developing instructional content that really sort of mimics answer services on the web, like Yahoo Answers, Wiki Answers, etc., that provides small, short answers to the questions that they have. We need to make that content easily findable 24/7, whether it's from our website, from other websites, in the physical world, wherever. And then, like we've talked about all term, really trying to embed instructional content as well into the fabric of classes, so that that content is available to them when they have a research assignment, and it is targeted to that research assignment. So these are all, disintermediated options. These are things where we don't actually really touch the student, but where the content that we're creating does have, hopefully, a positive impact. So libraries, for more than a decade, have been spending lots of time and resources on creating online learning objects. I mean, you search YouTube on pretty much any information literacy focused topic and you will find dozens of videos on how to do that part of the research process. But I think we often think of learning objects as instruction tools, and we design them based on often how we teach in the classroom, when really learning objects often straddle the boundaries between instruction and reference. And when you think about developing instructional content for point of need instruction, it should not be exactly the same as the kind of instruction we would do to support a course. Because when you think of somebody looking for a single thing, they're not necessarily going to want to watch a tutorial that mimics what we do in classroom instruction, which usually covers multiple learning outcomes. So when we think about it, do students come to the reference desk saying, I'd like to know how to evaluate scholarly materials. I would like to learn proper search query language. I want to know more about the information cycle. No, they come to the desk saying, I'm not sure if the article I found is scholarly. I'm looking for the book The Awakening. I need 3 articles on global warming. They come with very specific information needs, and yet the kind of tutorials we're building are on the information process, or the art of topic development, or introduction to library research, or research 101. And these things aren't necessarily bad. There's nothing wrong with them when they're used to support a class, because when you design something to support a class, you're designing it to mimic classroom instruction. When you're building something for point of need use, it really needs to be to the point on the specific topic they are interested in learning about. So we really need to sort of break apart those two kinds of uses for learning objects and think about, in this case, how do we build stuff for point of need use? So we really do need to focus on the specific needs. And how do you figure out what those specific needs are? There are lots of ways to get a sense of sort of what we used to call at Norwich the pain points, places where students have difficulty, where we need to either smooth the way for them through web design or something else, or we need to create instructional content that addresses those pain points. Looking at reference transactions is a great way to do that, and that could just be talking to the people who work at the desk a lot. If you work at the desk a lot, you probably anecdotally know what some of the things that students have trouble with over and over and over again, and looking at those and figuring out how we can better meet patron needs through instructional content. But also, if you do have reference statistics where you actually look at questions that are asked and answered, that can be really helpful. And even if you don't do that regularly, even if you do like sampling, you do it for a week during a really busy part of the term and collect all of the questions, those will probably be a good cross-section of what you need to cover when you're building point of need tutorials. Looking at web statistics as well, where do people bounce off the library website? Where do people have difficulty using it? Those can be both useful for redesigning the website and for really getting a sense of where people might need help. Usability testing is often a great place to find problems with students' use of library resources, also in ethnographic research. One thing that we're doing in an ethnographic study we're doing right now of returning students, we recorded students actually doing research on the web. And I always thought that WorldCat Local was, as far as library search tools go, fairly intuitive until I actually saw one of the students in the study using it. And I realized he was so overwhelmed by the number of links and places to click on a results page that he couldn't actually find the link that got him to the article he wanted to read. It was absolutely enlightening seeing how he used the technology. So now we talk about a couple of models that support DIY patrons. There aren't too many out there that have been created yet, but since the creation of Library DIY, I've started to see more and more libraries kind of trying to replicate that model in different ways. So at Hampshire College, as you can see, they have this great do-it-yourself browse point. And when you click on that, that gives you a lot of instructional content on like some of the basic things people need to do. Renew your books, find articles, request a book. They don't cover a lot of ground here, but at least it's some of the basic things that people probably commonly need to do. And similarly, UNC has a how do I browse point, sorry about that, which then takes them to this page with lots of, how do I distinguish between different types of journals? How do I find books? How do I find articles? Check out materials. A lot of those basic things that people need to do pretty frequently. And then there's Library DIY at Portland State, which is a much more comprehensive solution. And this was something that I led a team of my colleagues on the instructional design team to create what we initially called a reference librarian in a box. And I often tell students that it's kind of a librarian brain dump. Like any question they probably have about research can be answered in this system. So we, like I told you, with figuring out sort of what the pain points were, we figured out about, I think, 60-something pain points that students have, questions they frequently ask about doing research or using the library. And we built short, quick tutorials, not even tutorials really, just like a page with instructional content that addresses that need. And they're short. They're meant to answer their question in maybe 1 to 2 minutes. They're never videos because students usually don't want to sit through a video. They're usually text and screenshots that quickly answer their question. If more in-depth information is needed, we usually link out to additional tutorials or a research guide we've created on that subject so that they can get more if they need it, but it's meant to get in, answer your question, and get out. And then we developed an information architecture that allows students to drill down to just what they're looking for. So we thought of it a lot as sort of a reference interview where we say, what are you looking for? They tell us, and then we get additional information that gets them to just the answer that they need. So here's a couple of screenshots from Library DIY. This is the front page. So let's say that someone says, oh, well, I'm doing research and I need to find sources. And you say, so what type of source are you looking for? And they say maybe, oh, well, my professor told me I need to find articles in this specific journal. So look, there's a link to, I'm looking for a specific journal. And then there is content here on how to find that. So as you can see, very short, quick and to the point. Screenshots to make it a little more clear what they're supposed to be doing. And then on the left-hand side, related DIYs that sort of help them with the next steps. So, okay, here's a journal you need, and it's only in print. Well, now you can go to the DIY for finding an item on the shelf, or determining whether a journal is significant in your field if you're looking to find whether that is actually an important journal in your area. So those related DIYs are also very valuable. And at the bottom of the screen, which isn't actually shown, we have a Google form that gets feedback if they found that this wasn't helpful, or there's some error on the page, or if it was helpful, they can tell us very quickly in the web form. So this has had a response that has absolutely shocked me. This year we won the ACRL Instruction Section Innovation Award for Library DIY. We open sourced it a couple of months ago, open sourced the infrastructure so that any library can download this. It's Drupal based, so if they can install Drupal on a server, they're good to go. With this, they can skin it to make it look like their institution and add the content that's relevant to their users. And a lot of institutions I've heard about are going to be replicating it, whether they're using, whether they're going to be installing the DIY infrastructure, or some are even just doing it on websites, creating a library DIY type system, or some are even using libguides for it, which I think would be rather complicated, but I've seen some of the prototypes for people who are doing that, and it looks pretty darn promising. It's nice though with Drupal because it's database driven, so you're not dealing with a lot of pieces that will have to be changed if something changes in multiple places. It could be very frustrating to do that, I'm sure. We're finally doing usability testing. We've just had to sort of deal with a lot of red tape, which is why it's taken so long. We wanted to do it before the launch in the fall, but we're finally doing it this spring in a couple of weeks, and that should give us a sense of how well users are able to find the content when they have a specific task. We're also thinking a lot about marketing and placement. We talk about it in instruction sessions, we have a LibGuides box that a lot of people have put on their LibGuides to market library DIY. It's available in a lot of places on the library website, but we're doing a major redesign of the website, and I'm hoping that we can think about how to make this available at sort of the pain points on our website so that students can get the answers they need to continue with their research, and also how we can market it around campus to make it available to people and make it more visible, say in computer labs, department offices, etc. And with all these tutorials we've built, a lot of times I've found that they're just plain dumped on tutorial pages. And as you saw in, I think you read this in week 2, that study by Lisa Hinchliffe and Marinda Hensley, and I can't remember who the third author was, where they looked at tutorials and the students were like, oh, this is so useful, but I never would have known it would be on a tutorial page, and I never knew you had a tutorial page. We often bury this instructional content and expect that students are somehow going to find it. And I looked at a bunch of university library websites to figure out where they put their tutorials, and sometimes they're just so unintuitive, and they're usually multiple clicks away. So research resources and then start your research, fairly intuitive, but it's 2 clicks. Again, help and research help, intuitive, but still more clicks. Under services, I think that makes no sense. How about under library services and then instruction? That is really completely unintuitive and basically based on our org chart more than any sort of task-focused architecture. Putting them within LibGuides, I think, is brilliant, but that should not be the only place where they exist on the library website. And in some cases, I was able to find a tutorials page by Googling that university and the library and finding the tutorials, but I couldn't actually find them by navigating their website, which is just mind-boggling. So just because you build tutorials and dump them on a tutorials page doesn't mean anyone's going to come and find them, because you're not putting them at students' points of need. And you're not making them very accessible from the front page of the library website. So I love when they're made very accessible from the front page. So you look at the University of Auckland, it's right there, tutorials and guides. At University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, how do I? Right there. At my former library at Norwich University, right there on the front page. At NCSU, they have a mega menu, and I that's a kind of a big trend in library web design, is having these mega menus. So you go to get help, and then it's right there, so no additional clicks. And I know we've talked about getting in our users' flow, and we read that Lorcan Dempsey article in week 1, and this is really the place with instructional point of need content where we really, really do need to get in their flow. So we need to think about where are the places where users might have difficulty and or might seek help on the library website. And this is a list of a bunch of pretty obvious places where they might be looking or might have difficulty. So here you can see at the UC Berkeley Libraries Research Help page, they have links to tutorials as well. And I can't tell you how it surprises me that so many libraries that have research help, that offer research help, and have a research help page, only talk about the reference services. They don't also include tutorials there. It's very surprising. I love what the University of North Carolina at Greensboro has done with contextual help on their website. So they don't just have a help page, but on a lot of their main pages, so this is their collections page, they have this not finding it button. When you click on it, it takes you to tutorials and related pages that are based on the context of what's on the page. So as you see, find a book by keyword, by title, by author, tutorials that help them find to use the collections in the library. I think it's such a brilliant idea. This is a screenshot from a ProQuest database, and both ProQuest and EBSCO, I'm not sure if any other databases, but I know those two really big ones, do allow you to embed links to tutorials or library widgets, chat widgets, right there in the database itself. And not that many libraries actually take advantage of this, but I think it's a really brilliant use of contextual help and making help available at the point of need. At the Topeka and Shawnee County Public Library, when you get a 0 result in their catalog, you see they give you contact information for getting help from the library. There's an Ask Now button that takes you to their chat widget. And if they had a tutorial for their catalog, they could have it right here. They could even embed a video on how to search that plays as soon as you get to a 0 result. Lots of ways to make help available at the user's point of need or failure. But then we can also think beyond the library website and think about having help available in the places where our users are. And we've certainly talked ad nauseum about making library content available in the LMS, but there are other places where our users are frequently. Maybe there's an intranet that a lot of users use to maybe get to their grades, get to other university information. Maybe it's an internal city intranet at a public library where staff get information, and having library information that's targeted towards staff available there makes a lot of sense. If there are local social networks or even things like Facebook, like my former city in Vermont, Barrie, Vermont, had a Ning. I don't know if you've heard of that social network. I think it's kind of gone away for the most part, but we had a Ning for the city where people posted a lot of local events and stuff, and I thought it would be great if the library, our local public library, had a portal there where they could provide help and useful information. A lot of libraries have Facebook profiles. Not a lot of them include instructional content in it, surprisingly. We need to make our stuff available through mobile devices, and thinking about how we can make our content mobile friendly, I think, is paramount these days. And also, we can even actually make library help content available on the desktop. There's a way with Active Desktop to actually have links and even a chat widget available right on the desktop, so not even in a web browser. It's kind of amazing. I haven't seen too many libraries doing it, but I learned that it was possible, and I saw a library that had done it, and I think it's really brilliant. And then we also need to think about how to make digital research help available in the physical world. So, when we think about hyperlinks connecting web pages, and that was such a valuable thing because it made it so easy to make connections between one web page and another. We need to find ways to sort of bridge the distance between what we have available on the web and the places where students have difficulty in the physical world. So let's think about places where students have trouble in our library. So in the stacks where they get lost. I know in our building, because of the way it's designed, it can be because of the way our building is shaped and everything, it can sometimes be hard to know where the stacks continue. And no matter how much signage we put up, people still get lost and have difficulty. By collections that patrons have trouble using, maybe map collections, GovDocs, things like that. Machines patrons have issues with, like self-check machines, and also maybe like microfilm scanners. Or think about other places where people have information needs in the world, maybe like a small business support office, a technology incubator, a co-working space in your city, daycare centers, community centers, high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, all these different places where users might have information needs where you could link them to library instructional content. And the way that libraries have done that by and large is through QR codes. and I'm sure you've probably heard of them before or seen them or learned about them in another class. QR is short for quick response, and these are 2D barcodes that were originally developed in Japan for inventory control. And they are huge in Asia. They are on buildings, they are in magazines, they are on billboards. Any place where someone wants to get you more information than they can provide in that space, they have a QR code. They're even putting QR codes now on gravestones to get where you can actually learn more about the person who died by scanning a QR code. It's kind of mind-boggling, especially because they haven't really taken off as much in the United States at all. So the main reason is because you need a QR code reader to read them. And while those are free to download to a mobile device, you do still have to download them. They don't usually come native on our smartphones. And in Asia, they do come standard on all smartphones because they've become such an integral part of mobile device usage. So when you have a QR code scanner, you scan the QR code and it will take you to something else. It could be a video, it could be a Facebook page, it could be a website, it could be contact information. It could actually take you to where you could text a librarian, it could take you to an instant messaging page, all sorts of different things. As you can see here, this is an instructional handout that somebody gave out in a class. And you know, a lot of us give out a one-page handout to a class, but for everything we include on a one-page handout, there's always tons more information than we want to provide. So you could have a QR code that takes them to a web page with more information, or to a LibGuide, or to any sort of additional content, even a video that you want them to see. This is at Syracuse University, and this is their map room. And that is often a place where a lot of users have trouble navigating. I know even when I get a reference question about maps, I'm like a deer in headlights. So they have QR codes where if you scan them, you can see a map of the map room and also a guide to using the map room. So that can be really helpful for people trying to navigate it on their own and not wanting to ask for help. So we have a lot of devices like microfilm scanners and self-check machines that cannot be sometimes not super intuitive for the user. So imagine you scan a QR code and you can watch a video on how it works, and then you can replicate it yourself. So that could also be a really helpful place to have QR codes. This is an image from the Half Hollow Hills Library in New York and on Long Island. And at all of their end stacks, or most of them, they have an image like this that tells you what you'll find in the stacks in that place. And there's also a QR code that links you to the research guide or pathfinder that they created on that subject area. So if you're looking for cookbooks, for instance, you could scan this and see what also is available in their digital collections or on the web. Because chances are, if you're interested in books on something, you're probably interested in additional resources that are online as well. Here's a QR code that links you to the catalog. You'll find a lot of places have QR codes that link you to get help from a librarian also in the stacks. But this is great if you get lost in the stacks and you can't find the call number. Maybe you realize you didn't write down the whole thing, which students frequently don't. You can scan that QR code to get help. You're going to be reading this article this week by Allison Hicks and Caroline Sinkinson, where they put QR codes in the library in places where patrons have difficulty. So, for example, in the journals area, the poster says, how do I find older issues of the journal? Find call numbers for the journal I need. Find a scanner, find a copy machine, get more help. So it's contextually relevant help content with a QR code that links them to that help content. So here's an example in the stacks, a map of the stacks so they can find their call number. They can get help from a librarian. If they find the book's not on the shelf, there's information on how to do that. Where do they check out the book? All of the information they might need in the stacks, contextually relevant. I think it's such a smart idea. I think the biggest problem with QR codes, which I kind of alluded to earlier, is that they really have not taken off in the United States. And some people have already been heralding the death of the QR code and singing its eulogy. So QR codes have never really taken off, and they may never take off in the United States. Some people know what they are and have QR code scanners. Some libraries have done QR code scavenger hunts and have been successful at that as long as they tell users in advance that they need to download something, or they provide mobile devices that the students can use that have QR code scanners. But I see QR codes kind of as a stopgap solution until we move towards things like near-field communications, which are like RFID. RFID is an example of near-field communications. It's a tool where a mobile device can receive input from something in the physical world at close range. So it could be any sort of thing. You walk up to a book, you get information about it. But imagine you walk up to the microfilm reader, printer, and all of a sudden something pops up on your phone that says, would you like to watch a video that shows you how to use this? Or would you like help from a librarian to learn how to use this? And you could just click a button to do that. So instead of having to scan or take the initiative to do anything, it just happens automatically for the user. Until the point where we have RFID readers on our mobile devices, and every time a new iPhone is about to come out, they say, oh, it's going to have an RFID reader, and it's never the case. I've been hearing that since like 2010, and it still hasn't happened. Until that point, you can use QR codes, but also provide next to it, as you see in this image, a shortened URL so that somebody who doesn't have a QR code scanner or has no idea what a QR code is can just type in that URL and get the same content. So what we've talked about this week is quite a bit different from what we've looked at in the past with sort of high touch, requiring things that require collaboration. This is really about providing information and instructional content for users at their point of need that really doesn't require a lot of collaboration with other units. That really just requires understanding your user and being really smart about embedding help at users' points of need, both in the library website, on the web, in other places, and even in the physical world. So it's kind of another exciting way to look at how we can embed instruction for our users. And the nice thing about this is that the work is all front-loaded, so it's a lot of work at the beginning to build these things and embed them in the right places. But after that, it's just maintenance, and it's very easy to keep up with, unlike some of the high-touch things that we've looked at. I hope you enjoy the stuff you read this week, and I look forward to hearing your insights on it.